Welcome to the Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. Autism affects roughly 62 million people in the world. That's approximately 1 in 100 people. In the United States, just over 2% of the adult population is on the autism spectrum. Unfortunately, data shows that many autistic people are unemployed and underemployed, even amongst those with other disabilities. Helping to reverse this trend and improve the lives of neurodivergent people is Tara May, CEO of Aspiritech, a groundbreaking tech company whose inclusive mission is to hire neurodivergent thinkers and build on their strengths to deliver high-quality digital services and solutions. Put another way, more than 90% of the company's workforce has autism. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show CEO of Aspiritech, Tara May. Hello, Tara.
Hi, Fabio. I'm so delighted to be here with you today.
I am so grateful that you're here to talk about this very important topic. I just wanted to mention that I got these stats from ScienceDirect.com, the National Autistic Society, Autism Society, and the CDC. And I just wanted to ground our conversation as well for our listeners, just to define what autism is. According to National Institute of Health, autism spectrum disorder is a neurological and developmental disorder that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. Although autism can be diagnosed at any age, it is described as a developmental disorder because symptoms generally appear in the first 2 years of life. People with autism have a wide range of symptoms, which can include differences in social and communication behaviors, intellectual disabilities, and other physical and mental health conditions. And Northwestern Medicine says that neurodiversity is a term that describes the cognitive differences between how people think, learn, and behave. There is no single correct way for a brain to function. Neurodiversity honors each person's unique perspectives and experiences without judgment. So I wanted to start our conversation to talk about the myths. So what are the prevalent myths that you've heard about hiring neurodivergent people?
So, Fabio, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that information. It certainly is a mouthful, right? To share all of those definitions and all of those medical terms. And I think as we get started, I'm definitely going to share some myths with you. But I'd like to simplify it just a little bit for everyone listening. When I talk about neurodiversity, I remind everyone that it refers to all of us, 100% of us, because we all have brains that are unique and complicated and brilliant. We've got 86 billion neurons firing in here. The most sophisticated AI on the planet today can only simulate about 2 billion neurons. So these amazing complicated brains we have, that's neurodiversity. And about 80% of us fall into what is often referred to as neurotypical, meaning our brains work roughly like everyone else's. And then the other 20% of us are neurodivergent, which means they work so differently. It's outside the box, and it's something that we even put a name on or a diagnosis. such as autism, such as ADHD, OCD, Tourette's, etc. So when you think about neurodiversity, just think about all of us walking through the world, experiencing it a little different from each other because our brains are all so complicated and unique. So laying that as a foundational groundwork, I'll jump into a couple of my favorite myths. One was one that a team member shared with me. He says, everyone thinks of autistic adults as children. They think of autism as a children's diagnosis. They think of autistic adults as childlike. And that impedes abilities or thinking about autistic people falling in love, getting employed, living independently. And that is a complete myth. Autistic adults are adults. They're mature, incredible, brilliant, independent adults in many cases. And in cases where they are not able to live independently, they're still adults who have grown into their thoughts, their feelings, and their brains. So I think it's really important to step back and remember that. I also think there's myths about autistic people not having feelings or not being empathetic, because oftentimes, as you shared through the medical diagnosis, they don't express their feelings or their empathy the way people traditionally do. But in fact, we know autistic people feel very deeply. They're incredibly empathetic, often more so than neurotypical people with a stronger sense of justice for everyone and a drive for equality. So that's a really interesting myth that I think we can bust. Another is that autistic people have superpowers. And again, I like to remind people even positive stereotypes are just that, stereotypes. So they're harmful, right? Not every autistic adult is a savant or able to read sheet music when they're 3 years old or, hyper focus on millions of pieces of data. Autistic people are humans. And so at the end of the day, you can bust all the myths by remembering those great words that were spoken that say, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
I really like how you frame that in the sense that essentially what you're saying is that there's a diversity of strengths within the neurodivergent community. And I wanted to focus on that a little bit more. So, how do these strengths benefit the tech sector?
Well, look at you setting me up to talk about wonderful things. So I like how you phrased that question, Fabio, and I want to plus one it by saying we often talk about spiky profiles with neurodivergent people. So a cognitive profile sort of goes through our strengths and weaknesses. And neurodivergent people, or I'm sorry, neurotypical people, we have strengths and weaknesses that look roughly like this, right? Whereas autistic people can have great deficits, right? So maybe it's social, maybe it's communication, but they can also have these incredible peaks and strengths, such as creativity or problem solving or focus, right? And so if we spend most of their lives focusing on their deficits, which we do as children at school, in therapy, etc., what if we flipped that script? What if instead we honed in on their strengths and we paired that with a business need? Can't you see incredible things happening there? So, for example, we have on our team some highly visual people. And so we put them on a data annotation project that involved annotating digital images. And our team members were able to annotate those images faster and more accurately than a team who had been doing it for a decade within 6 weeks. That's pretty cool, right? And so I often think of it as this Sudoku puzzle. How do you take someone's amazing strengths and pair it to something a client needs, the tech sector needs, the digital transformation needs? When you can do that, magic happens.
What do you mean by annotate?
Thank you for clarifying my tech jargon. Annotate means that you are identifying what you see essentially. So you're taking the document or image or whatever it might be, and you're saying, this is where it belongs. This is how we're going to categorize it. So in this particular example, we were actually annotating images for the Transportation Security Administration. We were identifying what was in luggage to build the AI that would scan your luggage at the airport. So we would annotate a shoe, a phone, a hairbrush, but you also would note when something looked dangerous, right? So there are items that can't go through TSA. And so that annotation actually helps improve the safety of our national security and our flying.
So let's talk about your company. It's a mid-sized operation that employs about 100 people,
Mhm,
but generates more than $7 million dollars in revenue. I
mhm.
think that's incredible. My understanding is that Aspiritech is a nonprofit, but it's also revenue generating. So I'm wondering if you could talk about your model a little bit.
It's one of my favorite things to talk about because it's really unique. So, being a nonprofit in the US, similar to Canada, and we refer to it as NGOs all over the globe, essentially means that you have an incredible mission, and the money you make, rather than it going to a shareholder or to an ownership function, is going back into that mission. So at Aspiritech, rather than relying completely on donations or grants or government funding, we rely on our team to generate and earn their own paychecks, which is a pretty awesome model, right? It's like we're operating like a for-profit business, but rather than feeding it into shareholders, we're feeding it right back into our mission.
Interesting. You touched upon this, but your company provides a range of services, solutions, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I was reading that you do things like quality assurance, accessibility, and cybersecurity. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what else you do.
Absolutely. So our company was founded in 2008 as a model that looked at autistic adults being really great at quality assurance. For those reasons we talked about, right? Focus, ability to spot problems and recognize patterns. And it has been very successful as a QA company, and we continue to grow our QA division. But I think the founders actually built something even more magical than they set out to do. They built an environment where autistic people could be successful at whatever it is they want to do and whatever it is they're good at, where their passion meets their potential. And so now we've expanded. Over the past 3 to 4 years, we've added accessibility testing, cybersecurity regulation assessments. We've added data services like that data annotation project I was talking about, cloud migration, et cetera. And we've also launched into other arenas like digital marketing and creative services. So we're really trying to say autistic people are capable of absolutely anything if you give them the right supports and the right environment.
I really like how you said that you are growing your business according to the skill sets of your workforce, essentially.
Absolutely, right? And I spent 25 years in the corporate space in digital transformation for media companies. And this is a philosophy I carry with me from that work, right? Which is that when you position one of your team members in something that they are good at and something that they love, you have happy employees, you have happy clients, and you have growing revenue, right? I refer to it often as the ROI of kindness. When you look at people and what drives them, that is going to benefit your business. And I get to execute on that now with a wonderful neurodivergent team, but it's something I believe is important and effective everywhere.
I want to explore this concept of the ROI that you're talking about in terms of the investment of kindness within an organization, but I just want to explore a little bit more about your company specifically. What kinds of clients do you have, and what industry sectors do they belong to?
So we serve companies that have digital and technology needs. And whereas 10 years ago, that maybe would have been more specific, in 2026, every company is a digital company, right? McDonald's is a digital company. You can use your app to go through the drive-through. So it's hard to say exactly what our niche is. It's like somebody who has a digital or tech need. That said, there are a few industries where we really have excelled and found great partners. One of them is financial services. We work with JP Morgan Chase, we work with Goldman Sachs, and we work with about 25 companies where we help them do their FINRA audits and their accessibility requirements and that sort of thing. So we found a great niche there. We found a great niche in vet tech. Did you know, Fabio, that there's all sorts of technology for pets and for pet owners? People love their pets so much. So that has been some great partnerships with us working with IDEX and other vet tech companies. So there's a few areas where we've really sort of honed in, but it's essentially any company that has a project that they need to outsource or augment their staff with, we're here for them. And that ranges from two people startups to global enterprises like Abbott and AbbVie Pharmaceuticals.
I'm just curious, are there other companies similar to Aspiritech, or is it very unique in terms of what it delivers in the marketplace?
We're pretty darn unique in terms of our mission and our marketplace combination. Now, there's MSPs, tech MSPs, that means managed service providers, all over the place, right? So, absolutely, are there other places to get your tech team augmented? Yes. But we're really an interesting model because of our mission, number one, but also because we're a nonprofit. We don't have to have the sometimes difficult to manage margins a for-profit company is trying to make. We just want to be able to pay our team members what they deserve. And so that really gives us some differentiation in the MSP marketplace.
I'm wondering whether your business model and your focus on neurodivergent people have influenced other companies within the United States and around the world to do the same.
Well, we like to think so. And I can give you a few examples, right? Aspiritech is one of the founders of a global coalition called NeuroWorks. We actually have several Canadian representations on our NeuroWorks board and membership. And we're all organizations devoted to neurodiversity hiring all over the globe. We have membership in Asia, New Zealand, Europe, Canada, South America. So that is a really wonderful thing to be a part of, to have all these allies all over the globe who are standing arm in arm with you to fulfill this mission together. It's a pretty neat. Not enough of us, as you can tell by those stats, right? But that makes us all the more close-knit.
So I want to go back on something that you said, and this is around kindness. And one of the things that I learned about you in listening to another podcast that you did is that you really operate within your organization by accommodating people within the workplace. And I heard you say specifically that it is such an important thing to be able to accommodate staff that really doesn't take all that much effort. So I'm wondering whether you could talk a little bit more about that.
One of my favorite topics. So absolutely I can. And I saw you pause so thoughtfully, Fabio, around that word accommodate because it comes with some baggage, right? When people think about accommodations, they think, oh my gosh, that's expensive, that's difficult. You know, if you're an HR person, you might even like cringe a little bit, right, about having to deal with accommodations. And part of what I talk about is throwing all that stigma out the window, right? We are all humans, every single one of us, and we are wonderful, imperfect, and we all have needs, and we're allowed to have needs, right? I myself, I'm an eldest daughter, I'm an eldest granddaughter, I'm a straight A student, and most of my life, I've tried not to have needs, or at least not to talk about them. because that seemed like a sign of weakness to me. And when my son was diagnosed as autistic and was at 5, he was pre-verbal until he was 7, and he had a lot of needs. And he taught me I need to reframe that thinking. It is wrong because he is allowed to have needs and we should fulfill them, and that will help him reach his fullest potential. And it started to give me more grace to myself and more grace to people around me. And I saw it impacting the way that I led and the way that I worked, allowing people to have needs and finding a way to support them actually makes you stronger, them stronger, your organization stronger and more resilient. And that leads to revenue growth, to innovation, to great things happening at the pace of digital and AI in 2026. That psychological safety is not just nice, it's imperative. So I often tell my son he reframed the entire way that I look at the world. And that's one of the ways by throwing out all that stigma around having needs.
Is that the drive or the force behind your passion in working with neurodivergent people because of your son?
He opened my eyes to seeing neurodiversity all around me. And I'm a mom, so my children are always going to be part of what inspires me. He is a huge piece of it. However, I would add that as a working woman for 25 years, I also think workplaces can and should be better. And so I am here to build a better world for my son, for 100 incredible, brilliant, hardworking autistic team members I work with today, and every person who is going to spend a huge chunk of their waking life in the workplace for a long, long time to come.
I'm wondering, what are the technological challenges of today that might benefit from a neurodivergent workforce in terms of meeting those hurdles?
That's such a great question, and it's something I get to see in action all day, every day, right? One is through our accessibility testing. We are trying to make sure that absolutely everyone has access to digital products in 2026 because digital products are access to the world. At this point in time, they're access to food, they're access to healthcare, they're access to information, they're access to knowledge, all of it. And every person deserves to have access to that. So our neurodivergent team is great at doing accessibility testing to make sure people with physical disabilities, low vision, hard of hearing, or neurodivergent have access to all of that information. That's the bar, right? That's the lowest bar is to even have access to it. And then you think about all the ways it can make life better for people. I'll give you a great example. I'm actually using it right now. You're probably not even thinking about it. But the blurred background was actually invented by an autistic woman who was getting distracted during meetings at everything going on in the background. And so she invented the blur. Well, think of how many people use that now to blur out their animals, their messy homes, whatever's going on behind them that they don't want to share with everybody in their meetings. Millions of people use it, and it was designed as a neurodivergent accommodation. So you can see how that sort of outside the box thinking or that sort of canary in the coal mine, first person to notice the problem, is a huge asset in tech innovation.
I had no idea about that. That's super cool.
Isn't that cool? Google it later. It's really neat.
To my listeners, what do you think of my conversation with Tara May? I'd love to hear from you. Just DM me on Blue Sky at thestumblingspirit.bsky.social. I'm curious about learning more about your personal story. You were talking a little bit about your son and what sparked that interest in working with people that are neurodivergent. I'm wondering whether you could talk a little bit more about your passion for advocating for neurodiversity.
Sure. So my beautiful son, Shauka, is certainly a driving force for me. And I remember very vividly my sister and I were sitting in our living room and he was getting dressed or attempting to get dressed, but it was very difficult for him. And we both sort of were like, something's wrong, right? Something is not quite right here. And I had raised Chuck as my fourth son. So he's my youngest, he's my baby. So I had done this before, right? I'm like, and you're worrying and you're worrying and you're worrying, and you talk to the pediatrician, and his very first diagnosis is global developmental delay, which is essentially medical speak for something's not right, but we don't know what it is. And that was when he was 2. It took us 3 more years to get his diagnosis. And in those 3 years, I spent a lot of time crying in my car. I spent a lot of time feeling like a complete failure as a mother. He wasn't speaking. We weren't sure he was going to be able to enter the typical school system. I remember sitting at his first preschool meeting and them saying, we can't get him to lift his head off the desk or stop crying. I held him down to put clothes on him every day because his preference would have been to be naked and to walk out the door. Uh, I locked him in his room, not because I'm a terrible mother, but because he was wandering out the front door at the age of 3. And I was terrified every night when I put him to bed. I would wake up and he wouldn't be there in the morning. And these sort of things, in the moment, you're just getting through it and you're not realizing how much they're shaping you and how much they're driving you. And finally, as we got the proper diagnosis and got him the proper supports that he needed and the proper therapy that he needed, I got to watch him emerge out of all of that. And I got to watch him learn to speak, learn to read, make it to be a volleyball player on his middle school team, become an honors student, to take the stage in choir class. And you just find yourself thinking, I'm glad I was able to provide that for him. I feel so lucky. But what about all the people who are lost out there who didn't find that diagnosis, who didn't find those supports, who couldn't afford those therapies? And what does that look like after he's out of school and he isn't going to have that supportive environment surrounding him and he's not going to have me surrounding him, right? I'm not going to live forever. And it makes you want to change the world. It makes you want to make the world a better place, not just for him, but for everybody. And that motivation, that drive, it sticks with me every single day because I'm so blessed to have him in my life. He is sunshine in the sky for me. And I want every human to have the ability to fulfill their potential. And he's just one of them, right?
That's really beautiful. And I like how you said that he is the sunshine in your life.
He
That's just,
really is. It's really true.
you talked about after his diagnosis, getting the right supports for him. You also
Yep.
talked about accommodations in the workplace. As you know, there's been a lot of talk about DEI, a lot of
Mhm.
criticism against it, and controversy.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering whether you can share your personal thoughts on DEI in the workplace and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly is fraught, isn't it? And it is sad that we're in a moment in time where speaking the words DEI is fraught because like let's break that down, right? Talking about diversity of humanity, talking about equity for all those people and being inclusive to all of humanity, why would that be fraught? It's crazy to me. But I think there's just so many misunderstandings around it. And I even chatted with my parents one day about this DE&I topic. And my dad said to me, "Well, I don't understand how that impacts your work. You work with people with disabilities." And I was like, "Dad, that when you're talking about DE&I, that falls under that umbrella, right?" And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it that we have to work to undo I will continue to work toward a day when that is no longer a fraught phrase. And I will, until my dying breath, continue to stand up and say those are important words that we need to continue to advocate for. And you're not going to shut me down from saying them. I will not. That said, to be successful and to provide our team and our company, we will use new words also, right? We will talk about workforce development and the economic impact and the return on investment of being kind and hiring neurodiversity, because I believe all that to be true. I believed it when DE&I was a good thing to say, and I believe it now that it's a fraught thing to say. There is absolutely an economic imperative to embrace all people in the workplace.
I was chatting with someone else on this topic, and they said that they are changing the term DEI to human rights, but meaning the same thing, right? Meaning the same thing. And not because they didn't believe in DEI, they're totally behind it, but because, as you say, it's such a fraught or triggering term that organizations, in some ways, have to frame it in a different way so that it is more palatable to the workforce and to, I guess, their clients. So it's really interesting about how sometimes a term can conjure up certain ideas and myths about what DEI is about.
I completely agree with you and your unnamed friend because at the end of the day, and this is, part of what I was articulating with my son being such an inspiration to my journey. At the end of the day, yes, I believe in neurodiversity and advocating for neurodivergent humans. But moreover, I believe we should all be welcomed into the workplace and the world exactly as we are, warts and all, needs and all. Humans should be accepted exactly as they are. And I think that's what we're working toward. So, yes, human rights, humanitarian efforts, all of that, right? I'm working with, and as a Star Trek nerd, this is like the greatest thing ever to happen to my life. But I'm working with the Nimoy Knight Foundation, which honors Leonard Nimoy's legacy. And he was Mr. Spock. And Mr. Spock sometimes struggled to fit in, right? As a half human, half Vulcan, he struggled to find his place in the world. And so he became this symbol for autistic people who are also sometimes struggling to find their place in the world. And at the end of the day, the message Mr. Spock brought to us was live long and prosper, right? Don't we all deserve that chance to live long and to prosper?
I love that you brought up Star Trek. And it's actually a really good segue because what Gene Roddenberry tried to create was an aspirational world where and universe where different kinds of people can coexist in peace, right? Like that is really what the show is about, right? And it's futuristic with the understanding that we don't experience that right now in our current reality. And so I love that you brought that up. And so the question that I have for you is, what does an ideal workplace look like?
Wow, look at you with the thought-provoking question. So we talk a lot at Aspiritech about universal design, and I believe in the power of universal design. I believe in the premise that when you make things better for marginalized people or neurodivergent people, it actually makes things better for everyone. But I think what's even more important is that you recognize that there's no one way to make things right for everyone, right? What we need to do is respect the needs and the choices of each individual, which means it's going to look a million different ways. Sometimes people need a lot of spoken communication and a lot of processing time. Other people need to be able to process quietly on their own, right? It's one example of a million examples. So, in my experience, building the ideal workplace means listening to your employees and listening to what they need and being thoughtful about that and how you can provide a space where everyone is lifted up, where everyone is psychologically safe, and where everyone can be their best self. Because when you do that, they're going to bring forward new ideas, innovations. They're going to treat their customers excellently. They're going to be productive. They're going to accomplish more in less time. And so it's going to bring about efficiency. It's going to bring out growth and innovation. It's going to bring out excellent customer service. It's going to bring out new and exciting products. And all of that is what mixes to create organizational health and organizational growth. So listening, a leadership that listens, employees who have a voice at every level of the organization, culture. I talk a lot about cultures of gratitude and how you can instill that in an organization, being grateful to your team members. All of these things, they don't all look the same in every organization. They can be created myriad ways, but they all lead to happy employees and healthy organizations.
That's the return on investment that you were
That's the
talking
return
about.
on investment. You want to grow, happy employees is the way to do it.
Do you think that that's the main reason why Aspiritech has a high retention rate? I was reading that you have a 99% year over year retention rate.
Yes, yes, I do. Right? People don't want to leave. You find an environment like that where you're welcome as exactly as you are, where you're able to bring your full self to work, where you know the why every day behind what you're doing. Yeah, why would you want to leave that environment, right? And I'm really proud of that.
There was something that you said earlier, and this is when you were talking about the ideal workplace, and you mentioned something about the importance of leadership, of it coming from leadership. And I'm wondering whether you can talk a little bit about this idea of it coming from the top down. I'm wondering whether you can talk about this idea around corporate culture.
So I'm going to underline one thing you said, and then I'm going to expand on it a little bit. So, absolutely, leadership sets the tone, right? It sets the tone for how we treat each other, how we communicate and share information throughout the organization. Leadership has an immense, I often call it an immense responsibility, but also privilege to get to set the vision for the organization. However, that said, culture has to come from everywhere. It has to come from the top down, the bottom up, the middle, all sides, like a colander. Culture has to come from everywhere. And I'm going to give you an example by talking about tacos. You want to talk about tacos for a minute?
Absolutely.
Who doesn't want to talk about tacos, right? It's my favorite thing.
Tacos and Star Trek.
I'm such a nerd. I always tell people don't let the blonde hair fool you. Like I love Star Trek, cybersecurity, and tacos. Like let's be clear. Um, so when I started at Aspiritech 3 years ago, we, like many other organizations, have a very, very robust Slack presence, right? We communicate on Slack. We're a digital organization. We're mostly remote. Messages are flying on Slack everywhere. The messages on Slack seem to me to constantly be conveying problems and who either was at fault for those problems or who needed to fix those problems or what were we going to do about these problems. And I thought, problems are okay. It's good. We need to surface problems, but we also need to talk about solutions and we need to make sure we're collaboratively fixing problems, not blaming people, right? And I had heard from a friend about this tool called Hey Taco. And it's a really simple tool. Integrates with your Slack, and you are able to give people a taco emoji when you are grateful for something they did. And you get 5 tacos a day to give to anyone you wish. And when you get a taco, they fill up like a bank and you can turn them in for Starbucks gift cards or lunches or all these little, sort of rewards. Sort of like a point system. And within 2 weeks, of implementing tacos. We had 100 team members. Now, all of a sudden, reframing everything they were talking about to come from a perspective of gratitude. So instead of a problem being pointed out, it was, thank you, Sam, Brian, whoever, for helping me fix this problem. Or 3 tacos to the people in this meeting who solved this dilemma that they were working on. Or 2 tacos over here for helping someone proactively think of a solution to this problem. And instead of it being sort of top down, like employee of the month, right, where leadership selects and recognizes people, which is great. You should also do that. We all of a sudden had reward and recognition and gratitude flying around all corners of the organization, right? Employees at entry level giving it to each other, at entry level giving it to their managers, managers giving it to their co-managers and their employees. I would get a taco, and I gotta tell you, it feels just as good when the CEO gets a taco. You're like, thank you. I'm so glad that I helped you or was able to do something for you. So tacos created this culture of gratitude at our organization. And it changed the way we all talked to each other. And it changed the way we thought about problems because they exist everywhere, right? And it rewarded innovation and idea solving and peer relationships. And I love that. There's something magical there. So whether it's Hey Taco or some other system that you create, I think culture has to infiltrate your organization all day, every day in a million little ways that reflect a bigger change.
Aspiritech is a business. So,
Yeah.
how do you balance work culture with performance, innovation, and growth?
We don't have to balance it. They're intrinsically linked together, right? When you take good care of your employees, they take good care of customers. When you create psychological safety, people execute on new ideas and they try new things and they get really innovative and excited. When you give people what they need, accommodations, supports, whatever it is, they're more productive, they're more engaged, right? Our engagement survey, which you mentioned, reflects our retention rate. It also reflects how many team members report themselves as engaged or highly engaged in their work. And we have a 90% engaged or highly engaged rate. For-profit companies would kill for that. We used to run the same engagement surveys in my corporate environment, and we would be lauding the departments that got over 50%. So I would say to you that it's not a balancing act, it's causation.
You know, it's funny about what you just said. Years ago, a senior leader just wanted to chat with me about my leadership style. And he asked me, he said, well, what do you think is the most important thing of a leader? And
Yeah.
I said, keeping my team happy. And I understood that as long as I kept my team happy, that well, first of all, it's the ethical thing to do. But secondly, that the output of what they did in terms of quality, in terms of effort, in terms of outcomes were tremendous. And that was something that I felt important to cultivate and continue cultivating within my team. And what was interesting about this conversation was that initially he challenged me on that point in terms of, the party line of, it's about meeting objectives and, the goals of the organization. But I was thinking about it from, as you say, the causation standpoint. And years later, he sent me a note and he said, "You're right."
I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. And I love that he was able to reflect on himself and say, I see what Fabio was saying now. And he was right about that. Can I give you another example?
Yes.
So during COVID, I was leading a pretty massive media team. So it's about $20 million in revenue and 4 of the executives that reported to me. I was the C-suiter over the media team, and there were 4 women executives reporting into me. And women had it particularly hard during COVID. and what I mean by women really is working mothers, right? Who were trying to juggle the fact that school, childcare, all of these systems that support them were shut down. And so they were at home dealing with everything from babies to elementary students who needed them to be their teacher to high school students who were pouting in their rooms and everything was horrible, right? And I said to these working women, we are not going to mute button our way through this, right? And what I mean by that is pretend those kids aren't there. Be on the
Hmm.
backgrounds of these executive calls and client calls, trying to feed someone or help someone with homework and not tell your boss about it and, sort of live in this shame of being a working mother. I said, if you need to go, you need to go, right? We are all in this together. And that media division ended up having 150% growth that year, taking on a huge chunk of the revenue from the live events that had shut down. We had traffic skyrocket because everybody in the world needed information about COVID. And we had a team led by 5 working moms, the 4 women and myself, who were trying to pull double duty all day, every day, work and take care of these children who were now home every day. And we got through it together and we earned the revenue for most of the company that year because events were shut down. And we did it by treating each other well, by treating our team members well, by caring about each other, and by sticking through it together. We got more work done with more demand on us and less time. And we did it by caring about each other. And I think there's a really special lesson I carry with me from that.
That's really powerful. Where do you see the future? We were talking about Star Trek and that sort of idealized world where everyone coexisted in peace and, these ideals, these human ideals that we don't necessarily embody at this point in time. I'm wondering whether you have an idea of where you see the future in terms of the workplace and where neurodivergent people fit within the framework of that.
Yeah, so um, I think it's a hard moment in time to feel like we can optimistically talk about the future because it's been a hard couple years, right? It has felt like a major step back in a lot of human rights aspects for women, for immigrants, for people of color. It's not been easy, and it's not been an easy environment to feel good about every day. But I am a big believer, whether I'm talking about my autistic son or my employees or myself or the world, that progress is not a straight line. It isn't always just up, right? It's up and a setback. It's up and a setback. And sometimes the setbacks make us stronger. Sometimes they needed to happen to help us see something or come together. And it feels like we're in a little bit of a setback right now. But I also know there are a lot of people who are fighting for and advocating for the progress. And there's a lot of amazing things happening. And there's always going to be pushback to those amazing things. But at the end of the day, I think the good wins out. I see that happening in neurodiversity employee resource groups popping up at big companies and small companies and all over the place. That didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. It wasn't even part of the national vernacular, right? Now neurodiversity is a word you hear. When my son's diagnosis happened, it took us 2 years to get the diagnosis, and the only example I had was institutionalized people like on Rain Man, right? Now autistic representation is all over the place. And I hope I was a part of that, right? A little voice. So I think we hang in there and we keep working and we know that progress isn't a straight line and we see great things to come.
What does resilience mean to you?
Resilience means hanging in there even when it doesn't work a million times over, right? Knock me down, I'll get back up again, as the song goes. So that's, I think, what resilience means to me, right? I'm a girl who grew up in a very low income environment. I grew up in a trailer, and resilience to me at that age just meant getting out of my little town, right? That was my whole goal, was to get out of that little town. And now I feel like I'm a person who influences culture and change around the globe. I never had any clue that that was going to be something that was within my life or my purview or my grasp. So it's just keep going, taking that next step in front of you, because you have no idea how much you're capable of and what your potential actually is. So, getting up in the morning, taking a breath, feeling lucky to be alive, and putting that next step in front of your feet, that's resilience.
One of the things I'm exploring this season is how compassion influences resilience. And I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts about that.
I'm pausing to think how I want to respond to that brilliant question. And I think what I will say is that compassion is resilience. Compassion for yourself, for the people around you, saying we're going to get through this and we're going to get through this together and we're going to care about each other as we get through it. That's what allows you to be resilient. That's what allows you to keep going day after day and setback after setback. Would resilience even exist without compassion, without kindness? I'm not sure it would.
What are your practices of resilience?
I feel like maybe if you're asking me about my coping strategies when things go wrong, I could tell you that my good coping strategies are, I love Orange Theory, I love to run, I love to Peloton. My poor coping strategies are that I also love a good bag of Doritos and a binge session in front of a TV when I need to like chill out, right? But I think we're resilient all day, every day without even acknowledging it and without giving ourselves credit for it, right? We're resilient when we keep driving to work, even though we're stuck at a train or there's a huge traffic jam. We're resilient when the day goes as we didn't expect it and our meeting gets canceled or something gets thrown on our lap that we didn't think we were going to have to do that day. We face a million problems all day, every day, right? Big ones, small ones, medium-sized ones, and we get through them. And I think in some ways, I could give myself credit for being an incredibly resilient person because I've helped Aspiritech, I've helped my children get past a million hurdles that have come our way. But I think we all do that. We all do that. We keep going. In and of itself, think about what a miracle that is.
I like the idea how you frame it as a miracle that we're able to be resilient on a daily basis based on what we deem are the coping strategies for us to be able to do so. And you were talking specifically about, you labeled them good coping strategies. I'm wondering whether you could talk about how those coping strategies benefit you.
Yeah. And I think, if I were talking about someone else's coping strategies, Fabio, I would tell them, oh, all coping strategies are good. You're getting through it the way you need to get through it. But when I was talking about myself, I layered in a layer of judgment, right? And I think that's interesting. I'm pausing and recognizing, one of the things I say is you need to be kind to yourself, and that's the hardest thing to do. If you can be kind to yourself, you can extend it to anyone else, right? So if your question is what coping strategies do for me is they allow me to have space where I'm not always perfect and I'm not always my best self. And I think, I'm a perfectionist. I'm diagnosed obsessive compulsive, which I am not shy about sharing, which means I'm constantly putting pressure on myself to be perfect, right? I've sort of manifested all of my neurodivergency in high performance and high pressure that I place on myself. And I work really hard not to place on my children, which I'm sure I do a terrible job of. So those coping strategies for me have to be stepping back from that. For other people who are maybe anxious to take steps and sort of find themselves freezing up, their coping strategies might be little exposures, right? And pushing themselves a little bit further every day. So I think, what you're asking comes down to talking about neurodiversity in my favorite way, which is you need to figure out what you need. You need to figure out what coping strategies work for you. You need to figure out how to be kind and gentle and gracious to yourself. Because just because a bag of Doritos and 10 episodes of Star Trek is what I need, doesn't mean that it's what you need, right? And we have to allow for that individuality and that personalized expression of our needs.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you?
So, typical way that everybody will share is our website is www.aspiritech.org. But also, I'm on LinkedIn and I love these conversations. I love talking about workplace culture, about neurodiversity. So, connecting with me there is another great way to have a conversation.
Tara May is CEO of Aspiritech. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel inspired about the work that you do, your advocacy in just elevating awareness on neurodivergency and the work that you do at Aspiritech. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and just your heart.
Well, thank you for being such a wonderful, gentle, thoughtful conversationalist.
Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandez. Join me again for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Blue Sky at thestumblingspirit.bsky.social. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.